So we're going to continue on with our subject matter, page 118, and so we're going to start from the middle of the page, where it says, menses cannot happen before approximately 9 lunar years of age. So we're talking about menses, we're talking about what is the menstruation, the shortest amount of time. We're talking about postpartum bleeding. We're talking about the sickness bleeding. We're talking about what pertains to it and what pertains to it and the judgments that go along with it. We're talking about the prohibitions while in a state of ritual impurity for the woman who is going through these things. So we mentioned the details related to that blood. So we're explaining all of that, and we got to where the author said, menses cannot happen before approximately 9 lunar years of age. So one of the signs of pubescence is menstruating. So once a girl gets her period, now she is pubescent. And so the minimum age that the menstruation could occur is 9 lunar years. And we read footnote number 177. The least period for menstruation is 1 day and 1 night, and the minimum purity period is 15 days. Hence, the total is 16 days. So if the bleeding occurs within the 16 days before becoming 9 lunar years of age, this bleeding is considered menses. If the bleeding occurred 18 days before becoming 9 lunar years old and continued for 10 days, then the first 2 days are istihaba and the other 8 days are menses. So what does this mean? And so here also something to bring to your attention, something that is very beneficial for us to understand. When we follow the documentation style of Islam, and we follow the Sunnah, and we pay attention to the Islamic things, then, for example, we would know exactly to the day the age of, let's say, that girl. So we would know, for example, she was born on such and such a day of Safar or of Muharram, or on such and such a day of Rabi'un al-Awwal, or on such and such a day of Rabi'un al-Thani. So they would know the lunar month and the lunar day. And so they would be able to know if she is within 16 days of her 9th lunar year, or if she's 18 days away, etc. So that way, if she does happen to have that bleeding and she's not yet 9 lunar years, then the parents, they could determine, is that period blood or is that sickness blood? Because they would have documented that. And they would know when she was born, for example, according to the lunar calendar. Most parents nowadays, they don't pay attention to this matter, and they only focus on the solar calendar. And so because of that, if you were to ask them, well, how many lunar years old is your child, they wouldn't know. They would have to look it up and calculate, because they wouldn't even know what the lunar date is. But here we see the benefit of knowing that and sticking to the Islamic traditions, which is that the parent would be able to know that she is, let's say, 8 lunar months and 300 and something days, and so she would be 10 days away from becoming 9 lunar years old, or 11 days away, or 5 days away, or 2 days away, or 3 days away. And so they would know if she bled, let's say, a day before she became 9 lunar years old, that is considered period. If she bled, let's say, 18 days before she became 9 lunar years old, then it's not period. So the author said here that she started bleeding 18 days before becoming 9, and the bleeding continued for 10 days, and then the first 2 days are judged as istihada, and the other 8 days are judged as menstruation. Then the author said, the minimum duration of pregnancy is 6 months. So it's possible, that a woman would be pregnant for 6 months and she would give birth to a functioning baby, and that baby would grow and survive and grow up to become an adult. Its maximum is 4 years. The maximum term of pregnancy is 4 years. Its norm is 9 months. The norm is that the woman, she carries the child for 9 months. The scholars said the minimum duration is 6 months and 2 moments. So the 6 months start from the moment in which the husband and wife have sexual intercourse after the marriage contract. This is so because during the caliphate of Uthman, a woman gave birth to a child after 6 months of pregnancy. The people who Uthman used to take their opinion started to discuss her case, whether she should be stoned or not. Is she considered an adulterer or not? Ibn Abbas said a verse that means the period of carrying the baby until weaning him is 30 months. And another verse means the period until weaning the baby is 2 years. So you cannot consider her an adulteress. They all agreed with him and did not punish her. As for the maximum length of pregnancy, which is 4 years, it happened that Imam Malik radiallahu anhu had a neighbor who was a scholar, and his wife was a good wife. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said, our neighbor is a man of truth, and so is his wife. She carried 3 babies in 12 years. Allahu Akbar. So it appears that she had a 4-year pregnancy each time she got pregnant, mashallah. 3. Yeah. She carried each one for 4 years. However, most women are pregnant for 9 months. This is known through checking the cases of the woman, and through investigation, research, data mining, getting the statistics of that. So for example, basically the statistics. It's just knowing the statistics of, did this woman, how long did she carry for, how long was her pregnancy, these women, how long were their pregnancy, etc. The author said, forbidden during menstruation and postpartum bleeding are 8 matters. So now after we mentioned the menstruation, and that its minimum is 24 hours, its maximum is 15 days, and we mentioned the postpartum bleeding, we said its minimum is a moment and its maximum is 60 days. And we have not mentioned the sickness bleeding yet, but now we're going to mention what is forbidden for a woman to do while she's on her period or while she is in the state of postpartum bleeding. They are 8 matters: prayer, fasting, recitation of Quran, touching and carrying the book of the Quran, mushaf, entering the mosque, masjid, tawaf, sexual intercourse, and enjoying what is between the navel and the knees. Footnote 179. What is correct is that it is forbidden for them to stay in the mosque. However, it is permissible for them to enter through a door and exit another without stopping if they did not fear staining the mosque. The rule for the woman that's on her period is she is allowed to pass through the mosque without stopping as long as she does not fear staining the mosque. Because the entering the mosque on its own, like obviously if she's passing through, and going from one end to the other without stopping, that is considered to be entering the mosque. And that isn't forbidden as long as she does not fear to stain anything. And so that's why the author said what is correct. Yani the wording gives that false impression. Tawaf is circling the Kaaba, sexual intercourse, and enjoying what is between the navel and the knees. Hence, whether the female has menstruation or postpartum bleeding, it is sinful for her to pray. No makeup of these prayers is required. Footnote 181. So the woman, when she gets her period, she's forbidden from praying. And later on, after she gets off of her period, she does not have to make it up. She doesn't have to make it up. And this is a mercy from Allah. And had Allah Ta'ala made it incumbent upon her, it would have been an obligation. But Allah Ta'ala did not judge that she is obligated to make it up. So it is sinful for her to pray, whether the obligatory prayers or the sunnah prayers. She's forbidden from praying whether the prayers that she wanted to pray were sunnah or an obligation. So whether they were sunnah or an obligation, she would be forbidden from praying it. Or even to make prostration from recitation of the Qur'an. So there's certain verses of the Qur'an, when you recite them, or when you hear someone else recite them, if you're on wudu, then it is sunnah to face the Qibla, have the intention, say Allahu Akbar, with the intention of doing one single sujood for the recitation of that verse, saying Allahu Akbar to enter into that, going immediately down into sujood, saying the sunnah dhikrs of the sujood, then sitting and saying Assalamu alaikum to exit out of that. So that is sunnah to do when certain verses of the Qur'an are recited. So the woman who's on her period or postpartum bleeding would not be permitted. She would not be, it would not be allowed for her to do that, to pray, to do that prostration. Also, it is sinful for her to fast, whether the obligatory or sunnah fast. So while she's bleeding, she cannot fast. So if she gets her period during Ramadan, then during that day, let's say, immediately her fast is broken, and she just makes it up after the Eid. And she doesn't have to make it up right away, but she does have to make it up before the next Ramadan. So she can take her time with making it up. She doesn't have to do it right away. If she does not eat during the day of Ramadan without the intention of fasting, it is permissible. It is also prohibited, so basically if during Ramadan she, for example, doesn't want to eat and drink in front of everyone else, everyone around her is fasting, she doesn't want to eat and drink around everyone even though she's on her period, so she's not fasting anyways, but she wants to join in on the, let's say, not eating and drinking, right? Because there's other things that are not related to eating and drinking that would invalidate the fast, but she's not fasting. She could do those things, but so she is allowed to abstain from eating and drinking as long as she doesn't intend by that to fast. So here we see an example of the intention and how it matters. The intention matters. It is also prohibited for her to recite Qur'an in a way that she can hear herself, meaning if there is nothing that prevents her from hearing. If she, however, moves her lips in pronouncing without producing the sound, this is not sinful. So, in the Shafi'i school, what they call recitation is actually making an audible sound. Meaning, if it was completely silent in the room, the person would make a tangible sound. Not that the person has to literally hear themselves, just that they would be pronouncing the letters in a way that is making a sound. And that's in contrast to mouthing the words. Mouthing the words. Like, you know, when you want to tell someone something and you want to tell them, for example, so you're not making a sound, you're just moving your mouth with like the words that you're saying, but you're not making a sound. You're not saying anything. You're just saying. So if she does that with Qur'an, she would not be sinful because she's not making a sound. So for example, the person could do that and as long as they don't make the sound. No pronunciation of the letters. So, but to make a sound with it and to recite it, she would be sinful. Also, it is not sinful to recite Qur'an in the heart. So, if she, for example, memorized Surah Al-Baqarah and she wants to review it, but without even moving her lips. So she's not saying, she's just reading it in her heart, and without looking at the mushaf, or without touching the mushaf, without looking at the mushaf. She's just in her heart reciting. This is also permissible. And also it's permissible for her to look at the mushaf. So she can open or she can, let's say, have the mushaf opened, and someone opens it for her, and she can look at the page and follow with her eyes, reading the words in her mind. And without moving her lips, without making a sound, just looking and reading in her mind, in her heart. This is permissible. This is so because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which was narrated by At-Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah, that the Prophet ﷺ said what means, let the one who is junub and ha'il not recite anything of the Qur'an. However, the types of dhikr or junub is referring to the one who, for example, ejaculated or emitted the mani, or the one who had sexual intercourse. And the ha'il is referring to the woman who menstruates, or to the woman on her period. The author said, however, the types of dhikr which are mentioned in the Qur'an, she can say them, but not with the intention of reciting the Qur'an. So for example, she can say, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, if her intention is dhikr. So because the basmala, saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, it is a verse of the Qur'an according to many imams. So like Ash-Shafi'i. So the basmala is an ayah of the Qur'an. So let's say she wants to, eat. So before she starts eating, she says Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, as dhikr, for the blessings of saying the basmala before she eats, not with the intention of reciting Qur'an. This is permissible. even though those exact words are in the Quran, and those exact words are actually an ayah of the Quran, it's permissible for her to say it with the intention of dhikr, with the intention of, I'm mentioning this phrase that is rewardable to mention before eating or before starting something that has a religious that has rewardability, or something that's considered good religiously, or something that the religion orders you to do. It says also, it is prohibited for the woman in her haid, in her menstruation or nifas, to touch the Quran with any part of her body. To touch it with her hand, or to touch it with with other than her hand, and with any part of her body, is sinful, is forbidden. There is a verse. Also, here there's a typo. There should be the letter A. If you have the hard copy, it's page 119. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the bottom. Second to last sentence. It says, there is verse. Should be, there is a verse. That means it is not permissible for the one who is not in the state of tahara to touch the Quran. There is an exception for the hiddas that she carries on her neck. Okay, we'll get into those details. Oh, I see a question here. It says, what book is that? It's the explanation of Matan Abi Shuja', published by Tayba Books. You can order a copy off online. It'll be delivered to your home, very convenient, very affordable, and very well made. The people that put it together, they are God-fearing Muslims who their goal is to provide resources for the English-speaking Muslim so that he can expand his knowledge, so that he can learn the things that he needs, so that he can be a pious Muslim, and so that he can implement the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, if he currently doesn't know Arabic, if he currently is not able to read Arabic or understand Arabic, he won't be, let's say, deprived of these essential knowledges. Now, if he wants to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and if he wants to become a scholar, then yes, obviously, he has to know Arabic. But not everyone, let's say, is striving to become a scholar of al-Islam. Rather, some Muslims, they just want to learn the amount that they can use to be successful in this life and in the hereafter. Alhamdulillah. So I advise everyone to get it, and I don't get any commission from that. It's a sincere encouragement. The last sentence from the book. Not everyone strives to become a scholar. Not everyone is on the path of becoming a scholar in al-Islam. Not everybody wants to become a scholar of al-Islam. But in order for someone to become a scholar, they for sure need to know Arabic. That's for sure. They have to. But for someone to, let's say, be knowledgeable in the religion to an extent where they can be safe in this life and in the hereafter, they don't have to learn Arabic to do that. They can do it, and if they have this knowledge available to them, they can learn and they can benefit. So this is it's good for the English-speaking Muslim seeker of knowledge. Yes, I'll post the website. It's actually also a very beautiful and easy to use website, mashallah. So here he said, there is a verse that means it is not permissible for the one who is not in the state of tahara to touch the Quran. So there's a verse of the Quran that some imams interpreted as meaning that if someone is not on a state of purification, then, or a state of tahara, then they cannot touch the Quran. And for sure the woman who is on her menses, she is not in a state of purification. Then the author says, there is an exception for the hirs that she carries on her neck. She is prohibited, so the hirs, what is the hirs? This is something that is unanimously agreed upon in this Muslim nation, that it is permissible and beneficial and something that the Muslims do, or something that the Muslims have traditionally done. And basically, it's carrying certain verses of the Quran and certain names of Allah for protection from the devils, for protection from the jinn, and for protection from sorcery, and for protection from the evil eye, and for protection from certain sicknesses and diseases. So the Muslim would wear it on his neck, or he would wear it, and he would have these verses of the Quran written, or those certain names of Allah Ta'ala written like on a paper, and they would just carry it on their body. Doesn't have to be around their neck. It could be in their pocket. It could be, for example, if they're carrying a pouch of some sort, inside the pouch, etc. Doesn't have to be around the neck. But so, if the woman, let's say, had Ayatul Kursi written on a piece of paper, and she had it tucked inside of like a pouch or a compartment, and she wore it, it would be permissible, even though it's Ayatul Kursi. Even though, let's say, she has written on a piece of paper the last 3 chapters of the Quran, for example. So even though those are the chapters of the Quran, even though she's on her period, she's allowed to carry it. Because the hirs, and this paper, let's say, that has those verses of the Quran, is for protection and not for recitation. So she's allowed to wear it. The author said, she is prohibited from touching the book of the Quran, even if it has a barrier between her hands and the book of the Quran, except if the book of the Quran was in a luggage and the person who carries the luggage does not intend to carry the book of the Quran. Footnote 183. If the Mus'haf was inside a suitcase with other belongings, she can carry the suitcase while she is in her menses or postpartum bleeding, as long as the intention is not exclusive to carry the Mus'haf. And so here, if the person exclusively intends to carry the Quran by carrying that luggage, or by holding that luggage, let's say she was traveling, she has her clothes, she has her toiletries, she has some gifts, or she has some candy, she has some food, and also on top of that, she has the Quran in there. So and she's on her period. So if while she's carrying her luggage, her intention is, I'm carrying the Quran, that her intention is only that, then of course it would not be permissible. But if she doesn't do that, she doesn't make her intention exclusive to carrying the Quran, then it's permissible for her to carry that luggage even though the Quran is inside of it. Yani while she's on her period. No. That's just her being it's her being attentive to the fact that she's carrying the mushaf and she doesn't want to dishonor it or anything like that. The author said, if the intention was to carry the luggage and the mushaf, it is permissible, but if her intention was to carry the mushaf only, it is sinful. So, and it's like the case that you're saying. And she's carrying her luggage and she's carrying, she's carrying the luggage that's containing her clothes and she's carrying the mushaf as well. So that's her intention, that's what she's doing. Then this is permissible. It is not sinful. But if her intention is just to carry the mushaf, then it's sinful also, even if she's carrying it inside a luggage. Of course, if there is a necessity, it is permissible to carry the book of the Quran and to touch it, like if she was afraid that it might fall into filth, najis, and there is no one else to hold it, then it is permissible for her to touch it. If one has the book of the Quran and tafsir together in a book, she can carry it if she is sure that tafsir contained in the book is more. Okay, so for the case of the necessity, when the author said, of course, if there's a necessity, it's referring to darura, the Arabic term darura. And a darura is something that is inevitable, something that you cannot escape. So that's basically the case. The case is the only way to avoid for the mushaf to get contaminated with filth is for her to hold it in her hand. Then she holds it in her hand, even if she's not on her period. Because for the Quran to be touching filth is something worse than for her to hold it while she's on her period. So that's the reason why. Because for someone to let the Quran be in filth, that would be desecrating, belittling the Quran, and that would be blasphemy, of course. And blasphemy is worse than an enormous sin. And a blasphemy is worse than someone committing a sin. So in this case, her carrying the mushaf with her hands while she's on her period, because if she doesn't, then the Quran will be contaminated with filth, then this is permissible out of necessity, darura. Then he says, yes, same thing. No. You have to prevent that. You can't wait until they do it. If they were not to carry, she was not to carry it, it would be in filth. Not that it's already in filth and she just has to pick it up. She's preventing it from being in filth by carrying it.
Because really, in the second scenario, you don't know if the step on it.
Yeah, but still, it's prevented. It's so to prevent it. And the only way for her to prevent that is or she can, if she's able, she can prevent the kid from being around it or walking towards it, or keep the kid away if she can. But if the only way for her to prevent from it being stepped on is for her to pick it up, then she has to pick it up. Now, if she has a book of the Quran and tafsir together in one book, as you know, sometimes they have the verses of the Quran and they have the tafsir along with them, either on the margins or first the verses up top at the upper part of the page, and then in the lower part of the page would be the tafsir. So whatever the case is, if she has a book of the Quran and that also has tafsir in it, can she touch it or can she not touch it? She can carry it if she is sure that the tafsir contained in the book is more than the Quran. Furthermore, the woman during her menses is prohibited from entering the mosque, from sitting in it, and from going back and forth inside the mosque, except if the mosque has 2 doors and she enters from one door and exits from the other without stopping. This is if she knows she would not contaminate the mosque with blood. A mosque is a place dedicated for prayers. It is not a musalla, school, center, or room in someone's house. Also, while the female is in her menses or postpartum, she cannot make tawaf, go around the Kaaba, whether this is an obligation tawaf or sunnah, whether for hajj or umrah. It is sinful for her to do that during that state. The Prophet ﷺ told Aisha when she was in hajj and her menses started, what means do whatever the person who is in hajj is doing except tawaf, delay that until your hayd stops. This was narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. Moreover, it is prohibited for the woman during her menses or postpartum bleeding to allow her husband to have sexual intercourse with her until the bleeding stops and she performs ghusl. If the woman has sexual intercourse with his wife during her menses and she allowed him, both are sinful. It is an enormous sin. This judgment is known among Muslims. It is also not permissible for the husband to enjoy what is in between her navel and knees. Footnote 184. Al-mubashara is what is meant here. Al-mubashara is an Arabic term of basically, it's not penetration, it's not coitus, it's the man rubbing himself on her body without penetrating until he ejaculates. So if it was her thigh or her inner thigh, etc., then this would also be forbidden while she's on her period. Touching without a barrier. The word used here, al-istimta', can be by looking, and this is not sinful. Okay, well, so forget that part, the last part. The part that you want to focus on, he cannot, let's say, rub himself on her without a barrier in the area between her navel and her knees, even if it's without penetration, while she's on her period or postpartum bleeding. The author said, also, it is not permissible for the husband to enjoy what is in between her navel and knees while she has her menses or postpartum bleeding. It is prohibited for the husband to touch lustfully with desire what is between the navel and knees of his wife who has her menses. There is a hadith which means that one of the companions asked the Prophet ﷺ, which parts of his wife can he touch when she has her menses? And the Prophet ﷺ said what means what is above the izar. The izar is like a piece of fabric that the Muslim wraps around his waist that he uses as a garment to cover what is between the navel and the knees. So what is above the navel and under the knees he is allowed to touch. The navel itself and the knees themselves are permissible. This is if there was no barrier. If there is, however, a barrier so that the husband is not touching the skin, then it is permissible. Once the menses stops, she is allowed to fast before performing ghusl, but she has to make ghusl before she prays. It is an obligation on the woman to learn what she needs among the rules of menstruation, defective blood, istihada, and nifas, postpartum bleeding. If her husband knows those rules, then he can teach her. Otherwise, it is permissible for her to go out of the house and ask people of knowledge. It is even an obligation to do that. So the woman, she's obligated to pray, right? She's obligated to fast. She's obligated to pay zakat if she fulfills certain conditions. So how would she perform that obligation ignorantly? She won't be able to. First, it's forbidden. Second of all, she won't know what invalidates that and she might do it unknowingly. And so it's invalid because she did something that's invalid. But because she didn't learn, she doesn't know that by doing that, it takes her out of that deed. So what about then, in her case, where, she gets her period, she's obligated to pray, right? She's obligated to pray, but something happens with her. She thinks she's on her period because she's ignorant, she didn't learn. She sees blood, she automatically assumes it's my period, and then she doesn't pray. And she didn't learn the judgments pertaining to when the blood appears and which prayer has to be made up, etc. So she might be falling short in doing some prayers because she didn't learn these judgments. So, basically the point is, she's obligated to learn the judgments, the Islamic law pertaining to the judgments of menstruation, to the extent that she would not fall short in fulfilling her obligations, like of prayer and fasting, and she would not invalidate her prayer or her fast, and she would not do an invalid prayer or an invalid fast. So, since she's obligated to learn those rules pertaining to the menstruation, that means that either her husband teaches her, and that's fine, and he can teach her if he knows. But if he doesn't know, and she has to learn, he can't prevent her from leaving the house to learn. It is prohibited for her husband to stop her from going and asking, except if he goes and asks for her, or he brings someone home to teach her. Likewise, she has to learn the rules of praying, ghusl, the obligatory bath, fasting, and wudu. The husband cannot leave her remain ignorant about these matters and tell her, I do not accept for you to go out and learn. And subhanAllah, what kind of husband is that? What kind of husband doesn't want their wife to become knowledgeable in Islam and to know the judgment pertaining to these important matters so that she can make sure she is obeying Allah? The husband who does not encourage his wife to obey Allah, then in reality, this husband is not fulfilling his responsibility as a husband, as a provider, as a protector, and also as a Muslim, as her brother in Islam. Because whether we are tied to the person through blood ties or through marriage, we still have to encourage the Muslim, advise the Muslim, order the Muslim to do what is right, to do what is the obligation. The author said 5 things are forbidden for the junub. The junub is the person who is in a state of ritual impurity, either because of emitting the mani or because of ejaculation. Either because of emitting the mani or because of intercourse, sexual intercourse. So this person is not, he has less things that are forbidden for him to do than the woman who's on her period. So there are 5 things. For the woman that's on her menstruation or postpartum bleeding, we said it's 8 things. For the one who is junub, it's 5 things. They are prayer, any prayer, any type of prayer. This includes the Friday speech for the imam and the recitation of prostration. The prostration of recitation. Reciting of the Quran, like the same details as for the woman who's on her period. Touching and carrying the book of the Quran, same details as the woman who's on her period. Tawaf, and dwelling in the mosque. What is dwelling in the mosque? Going, let's say, inside of the masjid, and let's say staying there momentarily, or going and exiting from the same door. this is considered to be dwelling. These matters were mentioned when talking about the prohibitions for the female during her menses or postpartum bleeding. 3 things are forbidden for the muhdith. 188, the person who is in the state of ritual impurity because of something that invalidates wudu. So there are 3 things that are forbidden for the one who is not on wudu. He's not junub, she's not menstruating, she's just not on wudu. So there's 3 things that are forbidden for them to do who are not on wudu. Pray, any prayer, recommended or obligatory. Tawaf, circling the Kaaba. And touching and carrying the book of the Quran. So we only have 3 things. So what is among the things that we mentioned were forbidden before, like for the one who is junub, or for the woman who is in her menses or postpartum bleeding? We said that they're not allowed to recite the Quran. But here, for the one who is not on wudu, he is forbidden from touching and carrying the Quran, yani with the same details as the one who is on her period or postpartum bleeding, except that for the one that is not on wudu, he's allowed to recite as much Quran as he wants, yani by reciting out loud. The guardian does not prevent the child who reached the age of mental discrimination from carrying or touching the mushaf with the purpose of learning. This is an exception. So for the young child who is mumayyiz, who has reached the age of mental discrimination, so 7 lunar years, and they are able to not 7 lunar years, but they reach the age of mental discrimination. Yani if you ask them a question, and the way to answer that question is based off understanding the question and then answering based on that understanding, once the child reaches to that point, the mental discernment, this is called tamyiz. Once they reach tamyiz, that child can study Quran. So if it's for the purpose of studying Quran, then that child can touch and carry the mushaf as an encouragement for the child to recite the Quran, to study the Quran. Because children usually, they don't usually keep their wudu. So in order to not make the matter, in order to not make it difficult, yani in the religious sense, yani meaning beyond, yani meaning something that like a great difficulty. So in order to avoid that, the mumayyiz, the discerning, mentally discerning child is allowed to touch and carry the book of the Quran. And by that, and this is an exception to the rule, yani. And so as you'll see, is a common theme in the book. There are many judgments, and you hear about the exception to the rule. And obviously the exception is not the norm or the constant. Rather, the constant is, and if for anything else other than learning the Quran, the mentally discerning child is not allowed to touch or carry the mushaf. So, for example, a parent that's reciting Quran, he can't ask, let's say, his 8-year-old that's not on wudu to go and put the Quran back on the shelf for their parent. No. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. The next chapter is the chapter of prayer. Inshallah, we'll continue that. We'll start that next week. Page 123. So we're going to talk about the prayer times. We're going to talk about the obligatory prayers. We're going to talk about the recommended prayers. We're going to talk about the difference in opinion in the Shafi'i school between the Shafi'is and Hanafis in regards to the witr prayer. And we're going to go into some deep dives on the prayer, because the prayer is the most rewardable or the most important obligation after being Muslim, after having the correct belief in Allah. So if there's no questions, we'll conclude. I put the link there for those that want to get the book. It's toibabooks.com.